So I'll just let you know what is about to happen, all right? And then we'll start. So this is the very first debate, all right? And it's in the senior division. And we had given the topic to the students. So you can see different students from different houses up here, all right? When they've all finished speaking, then we leave, then we request people to come up from the floor, all right? Can we just... Could you please dim the lights a little, because I have to keep a lookout for something and I want to be able to see. Thank you very much, control room. Yes, sir. No, sir. All right, so this is the very first debate, and we have a debating society. And I'm honored and very happy to introduce the members of the debating society to you, 2022. As president, we have Divyani Vijayvargiya of 12H. Secretary, Amritesh Singh, 12S. And Secretary, Secretary Amritesh and Anurag is the timekeeper, right? And, two of them are participating. Amritesh is here. And today, Malika is helping us to keep time. So thank you very much, Malika. Right? Now, the topic. Lockdowns are essential to contain a pandemic. That is the topic. Each student gets 4 minutes. 3 + 1. All right? They stand there and they share their views with you. And finally, they get asked 2 questions each, which they have to answer. All right? And thank you very much, control room. The sequence that we're going to follow is Foy, Pal, Allen, and Condon. Now, today we're trying something, and the judges have their Chromebooks, and they're going to enter the scores there as well. So, I will be waiting. After the very first speaker, we'll have to wait for a bit, right? Anurag and Malika, you're going to help me, okay? We look at the judges and they will indicate to us that they've finished, right? Okay, you could actually focus this side and you can focus that side, right? And the judges, let me introduce them. Mrs. Pundir, Mrs. DeCosta, Mr. Singh, and Mrs. Chadda. So they're the judges, right? Okay, now I'm not going to wait any longer, all right? I will request Pavitra Israni of Foy House to present her views in favor of the motion.
We are going home because that is the best thing to do right now. Winnie the Pooh. Good afternoon, Madam Chairperson and the House at large. The word lockdown has recently entered our dictionary. Are unplanned lockdowns ineffective? Yes, they are. That being settled, let us focus on the core question. Are lockdowns essential to contain a pandemic? Most definitely. As my first constructive argument, I would like you to focus on the nature and structure of viruses. Viruses have varying abilities to infect people. For COVID-19, each person with the virus could go about and infect around 2.5 people. If each of those people go about their day as normal and infect another 2.5 people, within a month, 406 people would be infected just from that first infection. In the absence of treatment or a vaccine, seizing most human contact is really the only way possible to stop the virus from spreading. Given the rapid spread of the virus, social lockdown is urgent in order to bring down the overall transmission and to see whether treatment followed by isolation is effective. All this in an attempt to flatten the curve and to avoid infection. For my second constructive argument, I would like you to focus on how being careless could literally kill those around you. If I look at the mass, I will not act, but if I look at the one, I will. These are the words of Mother Teresa that exemplify the most baffling human response towards the plight of others. While most of us will see a single death as a tragedy, we might struggle to have the same response to large scale loss of life. Too often, the deaths of many simply become statistics. We all know that wearing masks, frequent washing of hands, covering our mouth and nose while sneezing or coughing is essential to prevent the respiratory infections, and yet we can be careless. Our masks constantly slip while traveling from public transport or using other common facilities. We are only careful when the lives of the people we care about are at stake. For my third constructive argument, I would like to offer an example of how lockdown is not a new concept. In 1918, Philadelphia prematurely ended its lockdown in order to throw a parade to boost morale for war effort. Within 72 hours of the parade, every single bed in Philadelphia's 31 hospitals was filled. As with any other pandemic, we see that there was a conflict between biological reality and the socio-economic reality. Biology is not changeable, but behavior is. What looking back at the pandemics of the past shows us is that disease is a formidable opponent, and whether our knowledge of medical science or our technology is medieval or modern, it is important for the past experienced to inform their present and future ones. Thank you.
Questions now? So if you have any questions, yes, please ask your question.
Madam Speaker, what do you have to say about the mental and physical health of the people during a lockdown? Don't you think it will have a negative impact on them?
Thank you for your question. About the medical health of the people who were in lockdown, I agree that it was adversely affected and not in a positive way, but being medically unstable for a little bit of time is always better than dying. If you're outside in the virus, we could die, but we can always take care of our health and overcome that mental illness. Thank you.
Yes, please ask your question, Gandidas.
Madam Speaker, now do you think the lockdowns are essential? Because the government has lifted the lockdown and we're all sitting in this auditorium together. So what do you have to say about that?
Since we all followed the previous lockdown and did our best to control the virus by staying at homes, wearing masks most of the times, now that it has been in a little bit of control, it is okay that we are all together and still taking the precautions we can.
Thank you very much, Pavitra. Now I'd like to request Tenzin Darker of Foy House to express his opinion against the motion. Just wait for a minute or so. Let's just wait for the judges to key in the marks, all right? All of them? Yes, please go ahead.
A state of panic is essential to contain a pandemic. No, I haven't got the topic all wrong. I have simply focused on what lockdowns induce. A state of panic. Good afternoon, Madam Chairperson and the House at large. On 23rd March 2020, the government announced a complete lockdown. This measure, taken in the name of public health, exacerbated many healthcare issues and inequalities. A country of 1.3 billion people was given a 4-hour notice to to brace itself for a complete lockdown. What unfolded was a humanitarian crisis. The official data records 989 deaths because of the lockdown, but the reality is truly shocking. Unavailability of basic necessities, lack of effective healthcare, absence of emotional and mental health support, and inadequate relief measures during the lockdown contributed to deaths and despair. Rivers were swollen with bodies, riverbed dotted with graves. Maternal deaths increased all over, and in Nepal, Africa, and India, mothers in labors died because of the lockdown. The lockdown also exposed the big divides like access to proper healthcare and proper sanitation. And of course, there's the basic question: who gets to eat and who doesn't? Even before the lockdown, roughly 3/4 of the population of India couldn't afford a healthy diet. For my second constructive argument, I would like to enumerate what is really essential to contain a pandemic. A. Planning and a coordinated effort. B. Accurate situation monitoring and assessment. C. Maintaining continuity of healthcare and fuel supplies. And the most important, effective disposal system for contaminants. The contaminants being human remains, used masks, and gloves. In my opinion, adequate action as opposed to senseless immobility is required to contain a pandemic. A key point to the lockdown pandemic control strategy everywhere has been to shut down economic and social activity. For millions of workers worldwide, no income means no food, no security, and no future. For my fourth constructive argument, I would like to ask you a question. Will there be more virus variants? Yes. In 2017, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the infectious disease advisor to the US president, said, "History tells us that we'll definitely get surprised in the next few years because of the virus. And there will be a challenge to the coming administrations in the arena of infectious diseases. We are encroaching into new environments and opening ourselves to new pathogens. We need to set up system in collaboration with other countries to prepare for such eventualities. The challenge is now for the government to work together and for people to change their habit. I would like to end my debate with the words of Ken Pyro. Be proactive, not reactive. For an issue ignored today can cause tomorrow's catastrophe." Thank you.
Right. Okay. Yes. Condon?
Mr. Speaker, don't you think that a planned lockdown is a really good option to control the pandemic in a better way? What are your thoughts about it?
Thank you. And with the permission of the chair, I would like to answer the question. Whether the lockdowns are planned or unplanned, it doesn't matter, because the lockdowns will definitely bring the economy down, and poor people will have to suffer. Whether, for example, if someone is already poor and doesn't even have a rupee, how do you think he can afford to get medical treatment from hospitals during the lockdown?
Yes, Avinas, please.
Mr. Speaker, you said in your debate that a lockdown turns into a state of panic. But don't you think that for the COVID-19 pandemic, if there wouldn't have been a lockdown, the cases would rise immensely, which would ultimately cause more panic?
Thank you for the question, Madam Interjector. The lockdowns are a state of panic. It's obvious because countries like South Korea and Sweden did not impose a lockdown for COVID-19, even when South Korea was one of the first countries to hit by the coronavirus. So we can obviously say that lockdowns are a state of panic, and there are other measures to control a virus without the usage of lockdowns. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much. You wait. Thank you. And now I'd like to request Nawang Sherpa of Pal House to present her views.
Would you like to see your loved ones suffering from a deadly disease? I'm certain that you and I wouldn't want to experience something so distressing. Quote, "It is health that is real wealth and not pieces of gold and silver." Mahatma Gandhi. Good afternoon to all of you present here, the honorable judges, Madam Chairperson, and my worthy opponents, and also the members of the jury. Today I'll be speaking for the topic, which is lockdown is essential for containing a pandemic. As we all know, COVID-19 is an infectious disease that originated in China. This virus resulted in a tragically large numbers of human lives being lost due to the negligence and lack of caution by individuals towards it. Now you will ask me why I feel lockdown is essential for containing a pandemic. During the pandemic, there was an absence of vaccine and treatment, and ceasing most human contact with each other was really the only way to contain this pandemic. Since COVID-19 could spread unnoticed so easily, many governments felt that the best way to ensure people have minimal contact with each other is to order total lockdown, with individuals only being permitted to get food and medicine, and to also practice social distancing when they do leave their houses. The significance of lockdown was explored using real-time incidence data in Lebanon. COVID-19 cases before and after the lockdown measures show that the nationwide lockdown was effective in reducing the cases and have so far been successful. This study was an evidence-based call for the continuance of the lockdown. Moving on to India now, the cases in India too decreased steadily when the government had announced a lockdown in the country. Now a question arises: what about the underprivileged? To this, I would say that the government of India announced an INR 1.7 lakh crore relief package to take care of the poor workers and those who need immediate help amid a lockdown. Through the online survey of Charity Aid Foundation, a global non-profit organization, we come to know that Indians donated 43% more than usual to charity. Some celebrities like Anushka Sharma, Virat Kohli and Priyanka Chopra too started fundraiser to help the poor during lockdown. Mind you, but it's not COVID-19 that introduced lockdown to the world. The concept of lockdown and quarantine has existed from ages to curb down emergency situations such as the bubonic plague, the Spanish flu and to the recent SARS virus. All around 20 years ago, a dangerous disease came to be termed as severe acute respiratory syndrome virus was detected in China. Though the disease was curbed down quickly, efforts of eradicating it first began in the form of quarantine and lockdown by the Chinese government. Districts were locked, people were told to not venture out and limit social interaction. The popular theory of how the bubonic plague ended is through the implementation of quarantine. The uninfected were told to remain at their homes and only leave when it was necessary. These are a few examples that prove that lockdown was and is still indeed an essential and effective way in containing a pandemic. Many may forsake the need of lockdown, but they need to understand that for a long-term betterment of a future, they have to put up with it for a few months and also take necessary precaution to overcome any kind of pandemic together. By not following this, they are not doing any favors to themselves or the people around them, but are instead extending the lifespan of the pandemic. In conclusion, I would say that those who don't bother to follow the protocols and disagree with the idea of lockdown are foolish and selfish, because they are not only affecting themselves but also the people around them. Also, the reason why I, Nawang from Pal House, am standing here and participating in this debate is because the lockdown did contain this pandemic. Thank you.
Questions from any other side? Okay, Foy, please go ahead this time.
Don't you think the relief packages that was provided by the government really brought to use?
Please, can you repeat your question?
Do you think the relief packages that was provided by the government really brought to use?
Really was brought to use. Okay, so with the permission of chairperson, I would like to answer. Of course, definitely, coronavirus, any kind of pandemic is a very challenging moment. Not everyone will get sufficient stuff, but I'm sure the government of India, which I'm proud of a lot,
has like given at least something, like some necessities. And also the people in India, I feel as a Tibetan over here, they are very kind. They have donated so many stuff. I've seen it with my own eyes. So I feel that every poor people in India got enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Nava. Yes. Alan, please ask your question.
Madam Speaker, don't you think that following necessary precautions for COVID-19 are enough and that there is no need for a lockdown at all?
Well, thank you for the question. With the permission of Chairperson, I would like to answer. See, definitely there are, like, of course, if you follow the precaution, there's no use of lockdown. But always remember that there are two kind of people. One who listens and one who doesn't listen. So that's what I would say. And also there are very stubborn people in India. You tell them to put mask, you tell them to sanitize your hand, they won't. And also in the news I have seen that this man is trying to fight with the media, saying that he can't breathe while wearing a mask. So these are all things I feel the correct thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Nava. We will wait and then I'll follow the next participant. All right. Anurag Yadav of Pal House speaking against the motion.
Good afternoon, honorable adjudicators, my opposition teams, and the chair lady, and a lovely audience. I, Anurag Yadav, speaking from the non-affirmative side, will like to recite a few examples of my own and also some facts. Let's first know what's the motion today. Today's motion is pandemics are essential to contain. Lockdowns are essential to contain a pandemic, and I stand here in firmly defiance of the motion. That is, I truly believe that lockdowns were a human tragedy and not a savior. Today, my 4 arguments will lead you all to believe that pandemics were and are not the thing. Well, let's first know how does a lockdown help? A lockdown helps simply by putting basic necessities away from us. Let me tell you how. Lockdowns pause time, nature and widespread and tells us all and the government to sit in the comfort of our own homes and get prepared. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, all of the pandemics are not going to be just COVID-19. There could be pandemics because of meat, there could be pandemics because of the contamination of food and water, there could be pandemics because of the insect bites. Lockdowns were not actually lockdowns, they were kind of more of shutdown. Let me tell you why. According to the Oxford Learner Dictionary, lockdown means pausing time and nature and the widespread and believing in ourselves, sitting in our homes. No, ladies and gentlemen, it was more of a shutdown. Why? Because we stopped factories, we stopped labor, we stopped every other piece of economic aspect to help us grow. I'll tell you how. Like for example, let's take a very simple example why my worthy opponents will say it was not a lockdown and more of a shutdown. This pen here is an implement of writing or drawing with ink or similar fluid. Calling it a pen or calling it this fancy words doesn't change the use of it. Similarly, calling it a shutdown or a lockdown doesn't change the use of it. Well, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, my worthy opponents will again counter me and say, but some countries were able to higher up their economic aspect as well. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that is not true. Only the first tier countries were able to do it to some extent and not the other tier countries. Now I'll take the liberty of coming back to a country which is I come from 2 Indias. One which pretends to be the first tier country and one which is in reality a third tier country. And we all know pretending always doesn't work, does it? And obviously we cannot predict the future, so let's see. Now I'll take the liberty of some facts to prove my already proven points, which is slums in India. 60% of India is slums. And trust me, ladies and gentlemen, you can avoid the birth of a child 3 houses away from you because we are living in a good society, but they can't avoid the death of a person which is 10 houses away from them. They use similar facilities, ladies and gentlemen, they use shared bathrooms. Lockdown, a big no-no in slums. Let me come to the reduced mortality rate, which will eventually prove my point. That is, When lockdown was in a discussion phase as a measure to control the pandemic, the reduced mortality predicted rate was 98.6%. But when it was actually applied, it was 0.2%, which is a significant drop of 98.4%, which is more than my percentage in class. So it's quite significant to me, not to my opposition, or maybe not, maybe to my oppositions. I'll end with a basic quote. Corona or not corona, it doesn't matter to me, because I want to eat food where money is. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Anura. Please, I think Alan has please go ahead, Alan.
Mr. Speaker, don't you think that if there were no lockdowns, our healthcare system would be overburdened? Because there would be no place to accommodate thousands and millions of cases every day.
Thank you for the question, Madam Interjector. With the chair, I would like to answer the question. See, Madam Interjector, I'll give you another fact of that. You said our health industry would be overburdened. For example, obviously the other countries are as well overburdened, and we are overburdened too. But a lockdown would overburden them not, or will they overburden? Let me give you a very small example of slums. People said because of the lockdown, people in slums did not get COVID. That is a wrong myth, and that's a myth and a wrong fact. Because after the first wave of COVID-19, when the slums, which are 60% of India, so I'm talking about India, and 60% of the countries of the world are worse than India. So that's a huge aspect. So when talking about slums in India, after the first wave of COVID-19, when they were tested for antibodies, 79% of them had antibodies. That means they caught COVID. And if even after lockdown they got COVID, 79% of them, and if that burdens the healthcare system, I think without it too will do it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Please ask your question.
Mr. Speaker, you talked about the economic backlash of a lockdown, but efficient lockdowns did show positive results. And also, what is the use of wealth to a dead person? What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Interjector. With the chair, I would like to answer. Mr. Interjector, we are all sentimentals here. Our feelings are bahut hard, but we are very soft. That's what a great poet said. But let me tell you, it's very simple. Even if we are sitting in a lockdown or we are not sitting in a lockdown, it doesn't affect us getting infected. So if you think we go out and work with the money, we can eat, at least able to survive through eating, than just to get down with COVID. With that, I would like to answer your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Anura. The next speaker, Divyani Vijay-Varghya of Allen House, speaking in favor of the motion.
With the permission of the chairperson, I would like to begin. Good afternoon to the House at large. The topic for this afternoon's debate is lockdowns are essential to contain a pandemic, and I would like to start by defining the keywords: lockdowns and pandemic. A lockdown is a state of isolation or restricted access instituted as a safety or security measure. A pandemic, on the other hand, means an outbreak of a disease over a wide geographic area, such as multiple countries or continents, which affects a significant proportion of the population. All of us have been living in a state of lockdown, or at least partial lockdown, for the past 2 years. And because in today's day and age, we are not equipped to being at home all the time, we often felt stuck. But some measures must be taken to preserve humanity as a whole. Let's go back 100 years and talk about the pandemic of 1920, also known as the Spanish flu. According to statistics, around 500 million people were infected by the virus in 4 waves and nearly 50 million people died. Some reports also suggest that this number could be as high as 100 million. And mind you, the world population at the time was only 1.9 billion. There were maritime quarantines that took place, and a lot of institutions like schools and colleges were shut. But at the end of the day, complete lockdown was not imposed during the time. An anti-mask club of around 2,000 people was formed in San Francisco, after which the city recorded 45,000 new cases and nearly 3,000 more deaths within the next month. When we draw a comparison with the COVID-19 pandemic, we find out that 430 million people have been affected by the virus and nearly 5.92 million people have died. And what we cannot miss here, ladies and gentlemen, is that the world population today is 7.9 billion, which is 4 times greater than what it was during the Spanish flu, and the death rate being 8 to 10 times less. Countries around the world faced a backlash when the governments tried to ease the lockdown. Let us consider the Kumbh Mela that took place in 2021. 2,642 devotees had tested positive in the span of 1 day, including dozens of top religious leaders, and what followed was a rapid increase in the cases countrywide, as at least 78% of the people returning from the festival tested positive. By the end of the festival, the state of Uttarakhand alone recorded 40,000 new cases. The point I am trying to make here is how vital the lockdown has proved during the COVID-19 pandemic. Had all the countries around the world not followed the guidelines issued to fight the pandemic, the human race today would be in a much worse shape. When there was lockdown in almost all countries of the world, there was restricted travel, which prevented the virus from spreading like wildfire. Former US President Donald Trump, who was strongly against lockdowns, said of the coronavirus, and I quote, "It's going to disappear. One day, it's like a miracle. It will disappear," unquote. It certainly did not disappear. In fact, some of the states of the United States of America recorded the greatest number of daily infections in the world. New Zealand, on the other hand, brought its coronavirus cases down to 0 last year by imposing a strict lockdown. China imposed a 2-month lockdown in Wuhan, after which the cases had gone down dramatically. Lockdowns are essential because otherwise thousands of asymptomatic people can go around infecting other people. In large, heavily populated cities like Mumbai, the only way to contain a pandemic is by ensuring physical distancing and imposing a lockdown. When it comes to containing a pandemic, a lockdown is a bitter pill that simply must be swallowed. Thank you.
Anyone to ask a question?
Miss Speaker, I don't know if you know about the research, which is the most recent research by the Johns Hopkins University, which says the same predicted number of cases and the same predicted number of deaths with or without lockdowns have been remaining continual. So if the deaths and the cases were same without or with the lockdown, what is lockdown? Why is lockdown beneficial? Please comment.
Thank you for your question. So what you're talking about here is one research. Most researches are based on past experiences and things that have happened in the past. And like I gave you an example of the Spanish flu, the world population at the time was only 1.9 billion, yet reports suggest that about 100 million people may have died. And the confirmed number of deaths were 50 million. And there was no lockdown that was imposed. So I think the lockdown that was recently imposed was in fact very beneficial and effective.
Madam Speaker, you said that lockdowns are essential to contain a pandemic. But there was a case during the lockdown that a girl wasn't able to admit her mother into the hospital because there were no transportational services and she was not infected by COVID. So I think the lockdown became a very big problem for her because she had to drag her mother on a bed to the hospital and still they weren't able to reach on time. So what do you have to say about that?
Thank you for your question, Madam Interjector. Well, there are pros and cons to everything. What we're talking about today, and like you mentioned about the lockdown that was held during the COVID-19 pandemic, the virus that hit us was so fatal and so dangerous and deadly that none of us had any idea how we can contain it. And the only way to contain it at the time was by imposing a lockdown. And yes, I agree that some things did not work out as we would have liked them to. But I think desperate times require desperate measures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amrani. I just request you all to keep your questions short. Like, for example, you gave an example, so you could say, what about medical emergencies, right? In particular, a girl who was unable to get her mother to the hospital, right? And the same goes for you. So keep it short and sweet. Even if it's a research, just maybe give the year and then ask your question, right? Can we all sit up straight, children? I know it's a little difficult, but you'll get through it. The second row. Thank you very much. Okay? Are we done? Yes, thank you. So now I'd like to request Sartaj of Allen House to express his views against the motion.
With the permission of the chairperson, I'd like to start my debate. Good afternoon to one and all. Is it necessary for scores of children to drop out of school and be forced to work to support their families? Do businesses have to shut down, causing hundreds of people to lose their jobs? Should poor laborers use their meager savings to return to their villages and to an uncertain future? If the answer to these questions is no, then, ladies and gentlemen, it is most definitely not essential to impose a lockdown to contain a pandemic. Before I proceed further, I would like to draw your attention to the meaning of the word essential, which is completely necessary. Keeping this meaning in mind, I put before you an argument that while lockdowns may be beneficial in containing a pandemic, they end up doing more harm than good, and hence are not completely necessary. To contain the spread of COVID-19, a nationwide lockdown was imposed from late March to May 2020. The unemployment rate in urban areas rose to 20.9%. Cases of domestic violence and child abuse rose alarmingly. Being forced to stay indoors led to children and adults alike developing physical and mental health issues like depression, anxiety, and burnout. Blanket lockdowns have taken a huge toll on human beings, economically, socially, and psychologically. So, do we just let people go around dropping like flies in a pandemic? No, certainly not. We contain the pandemic using other means. Let me elaborate. First of all, the government of any country that is aware of a possible pandemic threat must inform the rest of the world about it, so that timely action and preventive measures can be taken. Had China not concealed the truth about the coronavirus in its initial stages, COVID-19 would have never reached the pandemic stage. When a pandemic does hit the world, it can be contained by rigorous testing, identifying super spreader areas, and closely monitoring the movement and actions of the residents of those areas. The wearing of double masks and practicing social distancing can also help. Banning unnecessary social gatherings like political and religious rallies and sanitizing public places on a war footing, and also repeatedly reminding people to adopt hygienic habits also help a great deal. Closing international borders promptly instead of waiting for too long is also helpful. Developing more and more vaccinations and urging countries with a surplus to share with those that do not have enough is required, not crippling lockdowns. Countries like Sweden and South Korea have effectively used strategies like aggressive contact tracing and encouraging citizens to take collective responsibility for social distancing. The fact of the matter is that humanity will continue to be hit by pandemics. The current one is not the first and it won't be the last. COVID-19 is far from over. Every other month, we hear of a new variant or a variant of a variant. We cannot have lifelong lockdowns, can we? So, instead of bringing our lives to a grinding halt, we must remold our lives around pandemics and learn to adapt and change our lifestyles around the pandemics, depending on the nature of the pandemic. What might work against one pandemic might not work against another. For example, the HIV pandemic required different containment measures than those required for COVID-19. The one measure that should not be adopted is a lockdown. I would like to conclude with the words of Yale vaccine researcher Saad Omer. To get us out of this crisis, we need solidarity within and between countries. And we need trust in the vaccine, in institutions, and in science. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Questions, okay. Condon?
Mr. Speaker, you talked about prevention techniques like double masking and all. But there was once a public figure who said that in India, I belong to an India which wears masks, but children are hugging each other and walking hand in hand. What use is double mask if they are in contact? What are your thoughts on it?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Director. With the permission of the chairperson, I'd like to answer the question. So, like you said, that wearing double mask might not help, but I think that if everyone does their part, following basic hygienic habits like both the parties wearing masks and following social distancing, I think that would be enough to stop the pandemic. And moreover, I think that putting a lockdown would affect people's mental and physical health and get them health issues. So I feel that lockdown should not be imposed. So I hope that answers your question.
Whitehouse, would like to ask the question.
Mr. Speaker, like we all know that people in no country are so obedient. So what do you have to say about the people who wouldn't by any means follow the guidelines which you just stated?
So thank you for your question. First, I'd like to say that when the lockdown was imposed, let us consider the first was imposed. Lots of businesses were shut, many businesses lost their customers. So I think the lockdowns mainly had a negative impact. And if the people like Sweden and South Korea, they ask the citizens to take collective responsibility. So even if we educate our citizens to do the same, I think the change will be there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Devansh Negi of Condon House speaking in favor of the motion.
Good afternoon to one and all present here today. The topic for today's debate is that lockdowns are essential to contain a pandemic, and I will be speaking for the motion. First, let's understand the terms used in the topic. The very first major term is lockdown. It refers to a state of isolation used as a security measure. And the second term is a pandemic. It can refer to any disease that may spread over the whole world. One such recent outbreak was the COVID-19 pandemic, and it was referred to as a pandemic by the World Health Organization as of 11th of March 2020. The government of China was the first to use lockdown in the city of Wuhan and 16 other cities to contain this pandemic, and the rest of the world followed soon after. Now the main question that arises is why? Why did 214 countries think of the lockdown as the best measure to control the pandemic? Well, COVID, for example, is a type of virus which spreads with contact and is airborne as well. Various countries implemented lockdown to contain this virus, and the results clearly prove my stand. When you compare the figures that came up each day as cases before lockdown and compared to after implementing it, there's a drastic change in the figures. Lockdown basically advocates the idea of isolation on a large scale, and isolation basically refers to the state of being alone or separate, which is not a need but a necessity if we are facing a virus which spreads with contact. In the US, there were also people who believed in the idea of anti-masking because their fundamental rights were being violated. Well, if there are such people around there, such careless people spreading the virus, it is better, again, to implement a lockdown so that they stay at their home where they don't necessarily have to wear a mask, and also if they are suffering from COVID, they don't have to go on and pass it to others. Because of such reason, in comparison to the US, China has fared much better as they imposed very strict lockdowns and the official figures state nothing more than 4,000 cases. Even if my opposition would say that the figures are inaccurate, you cannot compare them to the US figures which nearing 10 lakh. Let's talk about our country, India. The figures were nearly about 70,000 till June 2020, and once the lockdown was phased out, it began to climb steeply and has reached 5 lakh. The death toll is too much after the lockdown, huh? Also, there have been cases where people are suffering from coronavirus, but because they were asymptomatic, nobody could figure it out. And such cases were out there roaming around in the common masses, passing them to each other. Again, for such scenarios, it is better to implement a lockdown where even if you are asymptomatic, you will be staying at your home away from the masses. And also, lockdowns are planned after giving great thoughts. The government has given their best efforts. They are trying to provide the poor with the food. They are there for transportation arrangements. Online doctor consultation is there. The education field has given the option of online classes. And the government isn't making lockdowns too long either so that the economy doesn't face a backlash too severe. People against lockdown have been also talking about the economic burden due to the lockdown, forgetting that the cost of setting up a startup or continuing with the business is even greater when a pandemic is raging and the lockdown is yet to be implemented. Apart from that, billionaires, millionaires, corporates have also been donating alongside the government so that the poor can tide over these difficult times without much discomfort. It is the honest intent of a government which will save the daily wage earners. You agree? As humans, in the name of humanity, we all have to help each other and make all sorts of little contributions that we can possibly make. In conclusion, I would like to only say one thing. Lockdown is the best corrective measure to contain a pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anurag, you did not get an opportunity the last time. Please ask your question.
Mr. Speaker, you talked about people who believe in anti-masking. Aren't they just an exception? Please comment.
First of all, thank you for the question, Mr. Interjector. Now, with the permission of the chairperson, I would like to answer the question. Well, we are speaking of the real world, and exceptions have always been there. We need to accept them. We can't just say there are exceptions, we can leave them. There are many exceptions, and we have to include them all. I hope I have answered your question.
Thank you. Alan, please ask your question.
Mr. Speaker, you repeatedly mentioned in your debate of a lockdown. But what about the multiple lockdowns that were implemented in countries month after month? Don't you think that was too severe?
Could you speak of your question in a bit simpler manner and make it more clarified?
Right. I think Devansh has said it. I wasn't listening. Could you please repeat it?
You repeatedly mentioned in your debate of a lockdown. But what about the multiple lockdowns that were implemented in countries month after month?
Well, first of all, thank you for the question, Mr. Speaker. With the permission of the chairperson, once again, I would like to answer that question. We implemented the lockdown, the very first lockdown. Cases didn't rise much. We were under control. We thought of continuing with the economic phase. We had to consider that also. But once we continued with that, the cases again began to rise steeply. So we need another one. Obviously, we don't want people dying out there now, do we? Thank you.
Thank you. Now, the reason why I wasn't listening to that question, I'm very sorry, is because I was looking that side. Can I request all the passengers to straighten their chairs, please? Thank you. And also fasten your seat belts so that you don't get to go this side or that side. I can understand it's a new experience. It's bound to be. You've not been in an auditorium for such a long period of time, but I promise you, grade 7 and 8 okay, that there'll be one for you as well, all right? So are you going to make an effort to sit straight? Give me a thumbs up if you are. Some of you not. Thank you so much, okay? Try and understand, okay? Because you've been also through a lockdown. I'm sure you know what it's like, what's not like. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Do you want another one? We'll come to that a little later. But please do pay attention. Thank you so much for that reassurance. Now I'd like to request, can I? Yes, Samya Gupta of Condé Nast to share her views with us. Thank you.
Good afternoon, honorable judges, members of the opposing teams, Madam Chairperson and the audience. The topic prevailing in the House today is that lockdowns are essential to contain a pandemic, and I firmly stand against the motion. The secret of crisis management is not good versus bad. It's preventing the bad from getting worse. And that is exactly what we're trying to do with the pandemic. But do you really think that lockdowns are a way to do that? I don't think so. The lockdown period was full of challenges, and each of us reacted to it differently. Difficulties and challenges covered a wide spectrum, but I'll be focusing on some main components, such as problems related to work, difficulties due to financial issues, and personal well-beings. Now, starting with my first constructive argument. A major lot of people had work-related problems, and the latest International Labour Organization data has revealed that the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown enforced due to that has had devastating effects on the workers in the informal economy and on hundreds of millions of enterprises worldwide. For millions of workers, the lockdown was the reason for no income, which led to no food, no security, and no future. Interconnected to this problem was the financial issues that were faced by people during the entire run of this lockdown. According to what a research center survey has found out, overall, 1 in 4 adults have had trouble paying their bills after the breakout of the virus. Among low-income adults, 46% say they have had trouble paying their bills since the lockdown was enforced, and roughly 32% say it's been hard for them to make rent or mortgage payments. Regardless to the current, past, or future effects of COVID-19 on you and your family, the lockdown due to the pandemic has affected and will likely continue to affect household finances for years to come. The GDP growth had crashed 23.9% in response to the centre's no-notice lockdown. According to a survey, India's GDP shrank 7.3% in 2020 to 2021. It also stated this was the worst performance in the Indian economy in any year since independence. As of now, India's GDP growth rate is likely to be below 10%. You people must be wondering that all my opposing team members have put dates and different kinds of statistics, and have not, because I think they've informed you well about that. So now, coming to my last and final constructive argument, that how the lockdown has had a negative impact on the personal well-being of people. The lockdown has led to different changes in the way we live, particularly for the people at high risk of severe illness from the COVID-19. People with pre-existing health conditions have been markedly impacted and in some instances left unsupported due to reduced provision of routine healthcare services. After stating these points, I think we can all agree that this lockdown has had its fair share of negative impact on the entire world. We don't have a definite answer to when this crisis will come to an end, But I don't think so that lockdowns are a way to live with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Questions? Please ask your question.
Ms. Speaker, like you said, that lockdown caused a lot of GDP loss or an economic disaster, but don't you think without the human resource, economy is of no use?
Thank you for your question, Madam Interjector. With the permission of the chairperson, I would like to answer the question. I think to get the treatment, health treatment, to get those health services and for basic necessities, you need some income. And because people were unemployed and jobless, they did not have the means to acquire those basic necessities. So I think the economic resources were very necessary for them to acquire those needs. I think I've answered your question.
Yes, Avinas, please ask a question.
There were multiple schemes provided by the government, and the PM Cares Fund was also introduced. Don't you think that saving millions of human lives should be the priority, and whether or not if they were able to pay their bills?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Interjector. With the permission of the chairperson, I would like to answer the question. Well, I think that they will become homeless if they're not able to pay their bills, and they do need a place to live to survive. And the schemes will surely help them, but if they don't have a place to live, I think half of the people would come on the roads, and we definitely don't want that. So I think I've answered your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Well done, everyone. And I know that lots of people want to come up here. We don't have a lot of time. So, listen carefully. We'll begin with 10 at the outset. 10. Then they wait, and then we'll call more. I promise I will. Alright? Because I did see a lot of people writing things down. So, if you'd like to come up and say something, please do. Line up right there. We begin with 10 and yeah. And of course, Malika, you'll keep an eye out for 10. 10, alright? I promise you that I will allow you, but I do not want a line extending to eternity. So just 10, please. Thank you very much. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's it. Okay, that's it for now. Come. But after, so when you just give me 2 minutes, right? Let me take care of this first. Good. So after we're through with the last one, I'll ask again for more, which I have promised. Himanshi in against the topic. And we will listen to what she has to say without talking. Thank you.
I think that mental illness is a disease, and due to the lockdowns, many people have gone into depression. This lockdown, which was actually meant to help us, establish, this lockdown, which had been established to avoid a pandemic, actually led to a rise of other problems such as depression and many others to come. Therefore, I think that lockdowns are not always the sole cure. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes? Lasang, in favor of the motion.
As we all know, due to lockdown, many people lost their jobs. But let's not forget that, on the other hand, we learned to adapt to the virtual world. People started working from home and new job opportunities were introduced. Thank you.
Thank you, Lasang. Via. For the motion.
Lockdowns are essential to contain a pandemic because if lockdowns wouldn't have been imposed, then the death rate would have been much worse than what it is now, and it would have been an adverse impact on our future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your name? Ashman. In favor of the motion.
Some people think that they are invincible and don't wear a mask, but they also encourage
others to not wear a mask. And these people are the first one to get tested positive for the COVID. So lockdown prevents that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwin. Saksha, against the motion.
I would like to say that because of lockdown, close people grow distant, in the end hurting each other. And that shouldn't happen. So I'm against the motion and I'm speaking this from personal experience. Thank you.
Ashwin, against the motion.
I would say that lockdown wasn't necessary at all to control COVID as COVID did spread. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sashwat. Anwar, against the motion. Okay, sorry.
Good afternoon to the House at large. I would like to speak against the motion. Because of lockdown, there was economic crisis in India. Many businesses got shut and hence led to unemployment. Thank you.
Thank you, Anwar. Arav, in favor of the motion.
Lockdown is necessary to stop the widespread of the pandemic. If it is not fatal for you, then it might be fatal or harmful for somebody else. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arav. Vanika, in favor of the motion.
If the lockdown was not imposed, the death ratio in our country would have increased, and that would have been really fatal for the population of our country.
Thank you, Vanika. Ria, in favor of the motion.
I might be a little off topic here, but lockdown was a blessing in disguise for most of us because it helped us to take a break from our daily chaos in our lives and spend quality time with our family. Thank you.
Thank you. And also it helped nature in so many ways. There were so many birds that appeared in the sky. There was less pollution. Please come. Neil. Vansh Gupta, in favor of the motion.
I would like to say, because the lockdowns are imposed, it is not necessary that only people are dying because of COVID. So the lockdown is imposed to decrease the cases. It is because many people die because of pollution problems also, like asthma and many other diseases which are caused due to pollution. So because of the lockdowns, the pollution rate has gone down year by year. Like if the lockdown was not imposed and the country would have been running like it used to, then the pollution rate would have been much higher. But because of this, we have gone, we can say we have gone down in the pollution rate. The pollution rate has gone down. So because of which, it is good that the lockdown was imposed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just show a show of hands if there are people willing to come up here. All right, please come up and line up. Just those many. Right, so quickly children. Right, so line up there and that's it. We'll finish with this line first. Just give me a second. All right, let me just see how many there are. So we finish with this lot and then get more people, all right? So that will be the last gentleman coming this side. So after we're through with these, we'll ask for more. Please come. Let's listen to the Envoy House. Thank you. Achintya Bansal, against.
I would like to say that imposing lockdowns on family which are struggling for getting their 3 meals a day isn't really fair, for the virus which has 99.8% of recovery rate. Also, forcing students to take dropouts of 2 years for the unprivileged students especially isn't really fair because online classes cannot take the place of offline classes. Thank you.
Next person, please. Your name? Samriddhi, in favor of the motion? Yes.
I'm sure everyone here will agree that the lockdown helped control the pandemic, because obviously the number of cases were very high once and still are, but if the lockdown hadn't been imposed, then it could have been a lot worse, and which would mean the number of deaths would be higher. So definitely the lockdown helped contain the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Samriddhi. Next one, please. Your name, my dear? Subir. Yes, Subir Gaur. Go ahead. Thank you. All right.
So, yeah, can anybody hear me? Yeah, okay. So, I'm against the motion, and I noticed something that people weren't talking about online classes in this. And what I think is that because there was nothing planned about the online classes, so like we couldn't study for a little bit of while. So that's why it ruined our future. So I'm against it.
Thank you very much, Subir. Stuti, in favor?
I think that if we don't confine ourselves and put ourselves into a state of quarantine, we are just putting the entire pressure on the medical sector, which shows our lack of responsibility to humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stuti. Right, you are?
During the lockdown, we got connected to our roots and learned a lot from it. Like, we were with our grandparents in lockdown, so they told us about the non-digital world, which we weren't aware of.
Your name? Anant for the motion.
All I would like to say is prevention is better than cure. And by keeping safe and following protocols, we can, it's better than to be affected by COVID. Thank you.
Thank you, Anant. Are you a new student? Are you a new student? No. All right, thank you. Please come. Yes. Your name? Shritin. In favor of the motion.
So the only thing is that lockdowns were there to prevent us from getting affected by COVID a lot, and it did help us by reducing the amount of COVID by a lot. There were still a lot of cases that were going daily to the hospital, and then people could not get jobs also. But the thing is that I know that people did have some mental health issues and stuff, but still there were many digital media apps that helped us, like Zoom and Google Meet apps that helped us go through the lockdown. So I think lockdown was essential, but right now we are all fine, and yeah, so thank you.
Alright, while we're talking, I'd like to know, if I could hear this buzz. Now, before I ask Divyani to share the tabulation sheet with you and to address you all, just something for the class 7. Okay, what was the most wonderful thing that happened to you, if there's any one brave soul from grade 7 during the lockdown? Nobody? Who? Alright, tell me. Come up and tell me, quickly. That way grade 7s also. Could you clap? Thank you very much.
So good afternoon, my name is Advik, and the greatest thing that happened to me during the lockdown was that we got a dog. So like, if the lockdown wasn't there, so we would be busy and no one would be looking after a dog. So it wasn't possible. But during lockdown, we were all at home and free. So we got one.
You know, hats off to Advait that he made use of this opportunity. So grade 7, even if the topic is difficult, at the end of every debate, I think we'll have a question for you if it's a senior debate, all right? To make it easier for you so that you can come up. And yes, what is the name of the dog? Advait? What's the name of the dog?
His name is Balto.
All right, so that's a nice name too. So now I am going to request Devyani, the president of the Debating Society, to share the tabulation sheet with you and to address you. Thank you, Devyani.
Thank you, ma'am. First of all, I would like to welcome all the new students to Wynberg-Allen and the class 7s. I really want a lot of new students and the class 7s and 8s especially to come up and participate in as many debates and elocutions as you can. Or if it's a senior or an intermediate debate, I would love for you to come from this floor and share your opinion. I would also urge the senior classes, the 12s and the 10s, to come up more often so that the junior students, the 7s, 8s and 9s can get inspired by you. And I just hope this year is an incredible year for debating, because for the past 2 years we haven't gone to the conventional debates. So I really hope this year brings a lot of new faces to the stage and we get to see a lot more of you on stage. Coming back to results, the individual positions are as follows. In third place we have Samya Gupta of Condon House. In second place we have Navang Sherpa of Pal House. And in first place we have Devyani Vijayvargiya of Anand. Positions are as follows. In fourth place we have Foy House. In third place we have Condon House. In second place we have Pal House. And in first place Allen
House. Wait. Don't stand yet, all right? Wait. Anurag, let's not. There are lots of thank yous, right? All right, we have to thank the judges. Thank you very much. And we have to thank the control room, Mr. Craig Tyndale and his team. Thank you so much for getting everything ready. And I like the effect over there. It's so wonderful to see the yellow and the red and the green and the blue. Thank you so much for these creative ways of making any program special. And a round of applause for Mr. Pant and Mr. Singh and Mrs. Arya, because they've been sitting together. And Mr. Pant came up with this brilliant Excel sheet where the judges key in the marks, right? And all those marks go to Mrs. Arya. And then you get the totals and the house positions, right? So a round of applause. It's nice. Thank you. And also thank you to the teachers, because they helped while we were testing it, right? It's so wonderful that we could do this. And thank you to Saksham, Shlok, Shashwat and Akash Bhaiya, and to Mrs. Arya for writing it all down for me, because she said, don't you dare forget anybody. So I haven't, I hope. And thank you to that little boy also. And I hope and I pray that you will follow his example and come up here. Despite some people laughing, it's okay, right? Thank you, school stand.
Shop, both his and his.